Have you ever wondered what you would do if, in the apparent safety of your home, an invisible presence began to weep uncontrollably in the room next door? That kind of question that lingers in the mind right before sleep. A macabre thought that explores the limits of our courage and our sanity. The fear of the unknown is an ancestral echo, a whisper within our psyche warning us that perhaps we are not as alone as we believe. The following accounts are proof that the extraordinary can break into the most ordinary of lives, turning the familiar into hostile ground and planting a perpetual doubt about the true nature of our reality. Unexpected manifestations, apparitions of witches, of specters, of enigmatic messengers, or something that claims to be one. Presences of creatures, strange entities that should not exist. In this episode, dear audience, we will hear testimonies of phenomena that arrive without warning, invading places that had never before been touched by the anomalous. The experiences of this evening are proof that at any moment, sooner than you might imagine, you could become the protagonist of your own horror story. The 1st of August marked another year since the most terrifying event of my life, and for that reason, I felt it was time to share it with you. I believe the moment has come. It happened in the house where I lived with my parents in 2007. It was a modest home, but with wide windows facing the street. At night, I liked to stay awake reading, because outside everything sank into silence. During that time, I had been absorbed in the Game of Thrones books. My uncle had given me long before I could ever imagine they would become a television series. One of those nights, well past midnight, I was lost in my reading when I heard a strange noise at the window, like someone scratching the glass with an object. I turned off the lamp I was using to read in order to look outside. The moment the light went out, I could make out a figure at the window. It wasn't a man, though it looked like one. It had a peculiar beard, thick, but not on the face. It grew around the neck, framing the entire head, almost like an ape, yet with human features. And there was an even more disturbing detail. Small twisted horns glimmered faintly beneath the streetlight. I almost wet myself in terror, because the most unsettling part was its expression. It wasn't pressed against the glass like a curious onlooker. No, it had its head tilted unnaturally, as if forcing its neck to watch me from an impossible angle. The skin was rough, like that of an animal, but those eyes were human, far too human. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The creature didn't smile, but I swear it showed its teeth in a threatening way, and they weren't human teeth. They were more like flattened, worn, yellowed fangs. I screamed for my parents, and as soon as I did, that being lowered its head and vanished into the darkness. When my parents arrived, there was no one outside, nothing, even though they searched the area. I know it wasn't a childish fantasy. I was 15, and never before, nor since, have I seen anything like it again. Hello everyone, my name is Ismael, and I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago in a town called Las Culebras, in Guasave, Sinaloa. That was where my grandparents' house was. We always called it that, the grandparents' house, even though they had been gone for many years. It was a small home, worn down by time and neglect, since it wasn't used daily, but it had become a symbol of unity for the whole family. Every year, on their wedding anniversary, all the children and grandchildren would gather there. It was our way of remembering them, of keeping a place to belong. Even though we were scattered across Sinaloa and even into Sonora, that house held something special. My uncles had grown up there. We had spent many summers as children in that place, and though with time it had grown empty, none of us could allow it to die. What was curious is that after my grandparents passed away, the house remained empty, but it seemed someone was still guarding it. El Negro. El Negro was a huge dog, very robust, with coarse, dark fur. He had belonged to my grandparents, and when they died, neighbors a few streets away adopted him. They fed him and cared for him, but every time we arrived at the house, he appeared as well, as if he could smell us, as if he simply knew. He stayed there with us, watching over the house as he always had. By then, he was an old dog, but he commanded respect, tall, scarred from past fights, with a deep, powerful bark that shook the ground. To all of us, he was a guardian. One year, when the family reunion was approaching, my cousins and I decided to arrive a couple of days early. Just us from my generation. 4 of us planned to go, but in the end, only 2 of us made it, my cousin Aurelio and I. The others had trouble on the road and had to turn back to Culiacan, so it was just the 2 of us in the grandparents' house. Honestly, we had never felt fear in that place, neither as children nor as adults. Yes, at night it became very dark, since the house was isolated from the town, and when night fell, it seemed like only emptiness existed outside. But we had never heard anything strange. That night, we spent hours talking. The beers for the reunion were ready, but we didn't even touch them. Eventually, sleep overcame us, and we dozed off in the living room on the old chairs and sofas. I woke suddenly around 3 a.m. because Aurelio was getting up. He rushed to the window, then quickly locked the door. Instinctively, I asked what was wrong. He looked serious and said, "I felt someone approaching." The way he said it froze my blood. "What do you mean you felt it? Did you dream something?" He shook his head firmly. "No, someone's coming." I went to the window and saw her too. A woman emerging from the darkness, stopping right outside the fence, staring straight into the house. My first thought was that she was a neighbor checking who had arrived, but it was 3 in the morning. Nobody shows up at that hour. Not in a small town where everyone knows each other. The woman raised her hand and waved. Aurelio shouted at her to go away. But the moment he did, she opened the fence and started walking toward the door. We pulled away from the window, and then we heard her voice. "Let me in. I just came to collect something. Let me in. I just came to collect something." My throat went dry. I told her there was nothing for her here, but she insisted. "It's something your grandparents owed me. I'm coming in." Aurelio and I looked at each other and refused again. At that moment, we heard her running toward the back of the house. We rushed to lock the rear door, and Aurelio suddenly had an idea. He whistled loudly from the front window. I didn't understand until I heard it. A distant bark. A deep, powerful bark I knew well. It was El Negro. Since we hadn't played music, he hadn't realized anyone was at the house. Now he came charging, growling, barking furiously. Outside it sounded like he was fighting something, but it didn't sound like a woman. It didn't sound like what we had just seen. I can't even describe it. A strange dry sound, like something heavy resisting him, before it fled into the darkness. Minutes passed. Finally, silence. El Negro stood at the door, hair bristling, staring into the night toward the place we had first seen her. We opened the door and let him in. Though he had never been the type to enter the house, that night we allowed it. Only then could we breathe again. El Negro stayed all night at the door, motionless, eyes fixed outside. Near dawn, he barked again. Carefully, we looked out and saw her. The woman was back, standing behind the fence. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. Slowly, she lifted her dress. And I swear to God, those were not human legs. They were goat legs, black, up to the knees. I couldn't breathe. Aurelio saw them too. He squeezed my arm so hard it hurt. She lowered her dress again, and without breaking her stare, pulled out enormous, rusty scissors from her back. She snapped them violently in the air, like cutting something invisible. She stayed motionless with the scissors in hand until the sun began to rise. Only then did she turn around and walk away, fading into the last shadows of the night. The next day, when the rest of the cousins arrived, we told them everything. But no one knew anything. Our parents didn't either. Nobody had ever experienced anything like that in the house, not even as children. It's been 8 years since that night, and she has never appeared again. But in the family, whenever that house comes up, when we talk about why nobody dares to stay there alone anymore, we all know exactly who we mean what visited us at 3 a.m. And El Negro is no longer here to protect us. Thank you for staying with us. Stories like the one we just heard remind us that some tales don't come from old legends or rumors, but from the most intimate spaces, family, the homes we inhabit. These are memories lived firsthand, passed down from parents to children, becoming the kind of stories no one forgets. If you too keep such a story within your family, feel free to share it with us through the email in the description. Perhaps soon we'll hear it here, among all of us. For now, let us continue. There are many more stories tonight. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name is Camilla, and I want to tell you something that happened a few years ago, before I had my baby, when I was working as a cashier at a convenience store inside a gas station along the highway. Contrary to what you might think, it was a calm job. Most nights, hardly anyone came in, maybe a tired traveler buying coffee, water, or chocolate for the road. I was never afraid there, because even though I was alone at the register, there were always at least 2 attendants outside by the pumps. Sometimes a strange person showed up. You know, someone talking to themselves or acting nervous in the middle of nowhere. But nothing serious ever happened. Until that night. I was behind the counter, looking out the big window toward the highway. That endless ribbon of asphalt stretched into the dark, with the occasional truck light in the distance. Then I saw a figure running. Yes, running down the highway. At first, I thought it was a traveler who'd had an accident, but the closer it came, the clearer it was. Something was wrong. It ran strangely, as if it didn't know how. Both arms swung in the same direction, right, then left, rigid, awkward, like a puppet. It sprinted past the pumps and came straight to the door. There it stopped, then walked inside slowly, as if it suddenly remembered how to move. Under the store's bright white light, I saw it clearly. Its skin didn't look normal, not wrinkled with age, loose, like its face didn't fit, as if the skin were a badly placed mask covering something else. Around the eyes, it was worse, blurred, raw flesh visible beneath, like whatever was under the skin wanted out. It came up to me and laid both hands on the counter, slowly. They looked like loose gloves, skin hanging unnaturally over whatever was beneath. It stared straight into me and smiled. Its teeth were black. Then it tilted its head to one side, tenderly, as if caring for me. My throat tightened, and I stammered, "Can I help you?" "That's fine," it said. The smile widened, and the voice, it wasn't one voice. It was many, low, overlapping, like multiple mouths speaking inside that skin. Instinctively, I glanced toward the attendants outside, but no one was there. She didn't move. She stayed so close, I couldn't get out without passing her. I asked if she needed anything. Water? Food? No, she answered flatly, without blinking. Then, what can I give you? I asked. She touched her chest with black nails, almost pointing as if what she wanted was inside me. Just then, outside, I saw an old truck pull into the station from the opposite direction she had come. It stopped quietly, with its lights off. It sat there for a few seconds, facing us. I didn't know whether to ask for help or not. For some reason, the truck terrified me as much as the woman. She didn't even glance at it, didn't seem to care. The truck started up again and left, without fueling, without speaking to anyone. It vanished down the road. I stood there, frozen in her details. The way her skin hung loose, her fixed smile, her dry eyes. None of it was human. I don't know how long it was until one of the attendants finally noticed and came inside. He opened the door and asked if everything was okay. The woman, without moving her smile, turned to him and replied with that same layered voice, "It's fine. I only came to see the girl." Then she turned, left, and the moment she stepped outside, she began running again in that strange way, both arms swinging the same direction, vanishing into the highway darkness. The attendant stood stunned. Before I could say anything, he said he had seen her face too, and there was something profoundly inhuman in her expression. The strangest part is, there are no houses, no shops, no factories for miles. Nothing. Where had she come from? Where was she going? And what did she mean when she said she was an angel? Does anyone here have a theory or an experience even remotely similar? Please, I'd love to know I'm not the only one. I still wonder what I saw. I want to believe it was just a very strange person, but I can't convince myself. Don't forget to pray to your guardian angel tonight. Good evening. I want to share a story my mother told me many years ago. Yes, please keep it anonymous. It's something she experienced as a child with her older sister. To understand, you need to know what they were going through. At that time, my grandmother had just separated. Life was very hard. She left the city to escape my grandfather, who was a terrible man, and tried to start anew with her 2 daughters. She had to support them alone, so she worked 2 jobs and was rarely home, often not even at night. My mother was 8, my aunt 10. They were little, but they knew how to take care of themselves. A family acquaintance helped by lending them a house. It was old, simple, just 2 beds and a sofa. Not much, but enough to survive. It had been empty for years, but for them, it was more than a home. It was refuge. My mom says that from the first moment they entered, they felt a strange sadness inside it. At first, they blamed their own situation, the sudden move, leaving friends behind, even leaving their father, who despite being cruel was still their father. They tried to adapt, to do their homework, to wait for my grandmother when they could, to cling to each other. It was the 3 of them against the world. But one night, my mom experienced something she never forgot. It was the eve of their first day at a new school. She and my aunt lay in bed, nervous and excited, preparing for the morning. It was the good kind of nerves, the feeling of a fresh start. The house was silent outside. Then, suddenly, they heard the front door open. They weren't scared. They thought it was their mother, maybe home early. They heard quick footsteps cross the living room and head straight to the bathroom. The strange part was, she didn't greet them as she always did. They sensed something was wrong. The girls looked at each other, then quietly stepped into the hallway. The door was closed. The silence unchanged. Only the bathroom stood slightly ajar, light off, and inside, they heard crying. A horrible cry. Loud, desperate, filled with sorrow. My mom remembers standing frozen, unsure whether to enter. They wanted to believe it was their mother, but they knew that cry wasn't hers. It was deeper, torn, as if the person was breaking apart inside. Trembling, they slowly pushed the door. The sound grew louder, unbearable, right in their ears. With shaking hands, they reached for the switch. The moment the light came on, the sobbing continued for 2 more seconds, then stopped. Silence. Nothing. No one in the bathroom. They checked behind the curtain, in the shower, behind the door. Nothing. Nothing. Only that echo remained in their heads, as if they still heard it. They had heard it perfectly, right in front of them. As if someone invisible was crying. They decided not to tell their mother. They didn't want her worried, didn't want her to feel she couldn't leave them alone, or that she had to find another place when they had just managed to get that one. Rent was impossible then, so they kept the secret. But after that night, the house was never the same. They heard whispers in the walls, faint voices blending with the wind, sometimes footsteps in the hall when they were alone. They never heard crying as clear again, but they felt, they knew, that presence never left. My mother says she can still remember that sobbing perfectly. The raw, broken sound, like grief torn from the heart of someone no longer alive. She and my aunt swore to keep it quiet, and they did, until she told me years later. Even then, her voice cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she remembered, and I couldn't help but imagine her as a scared little girl, vulnerable, trembling. What entered that house? What wept in that dark bathroom? We will never know.